Hi, I'm Bob Gimlin, and I received a cryptid report that's unlike any I've heard before, so I want to cover it mostly because I'm curious if anyone out there has witnessed anything similar, especially around the time and area that it occurred. Here it goes. Hi Bob, my name is Avery. I've only had one single paranormal or out-of-the-ordinary or unexplainable experience in my entire life, and it took place in 2005 or 2006, when I was 15 or 16. I honestly can't recall. This was in northern Delaware. The town is somewhere between rural and suburban. It has a lot of history, and I've always been fascinated by history. Everything has a story, a memory, if you will. It was about 11 p.m., and I was on my porch, waiting for my friend to come by, as he did every night. We were edgy teenagers, you see, and we convened there to smoke cigarettes. I could barely tolerate smoking, but this little ritual meant a lot to me. We had been friends since we were little, then he got popular and I didn't. So our little nocturnal rendezvous served as my little window to the world of the cool kids, which all seemed so important at the time. His parents were far more uptight than mine, and he had to sneak out, so it was a big deal for him, and I appreciated being part of his little risk. It's actually kind of funny looking back. He low-key acted like he was committing a felony by being on my porch at midnight, while my parents would have been like, "Hi," and then gone back to bed. My parents smoked, so I didn't have to worry about smells or anything. I think he thought he wouldn't get into college if anyone knew he smoked 3 cigarettes a day. Anyway, we had only been there for a couple of minutes when I see that he's looking past me. Story of my life, am I right? But he looked really surprised, startled. His eyes were somehow wide with wonder, even while they were squinting to get a better view. So I turn and follow his gaze, and I see it immediately, even though it took me a moment to register what it was that I was seeing. But it appeared to be a pair of massive, billowing dark shapes, just over and behind a house across the street, and down a couple houses. But it was pretty obvious that they were wings, and they were enormous. The wingspan was at least 30 feet in length, maybe even 35 or 40 feet long. They spanned at least half the house, and that house is huge. I just looked it up, and it's just under 5,000 square feet. These wings were at a minimum, a bare minimum, 30 feet long, and they weren't even straight. They were bent like 2 umbrellas, like how a heavy-bodied bird lands. The wings were dark, and it was night, so they were hard to make out at first. But they were significantly darker than the sky, silhouetted against the cloud cover. The East Coast never gets too dark on cloudy nights. I know how all that sounds. Trust me. I do. But I saw an absolutely massive pair of wings come down, hover for a moment, and then land on the house across the street. And it was on the side of the roof opposite from us, so I couldn't actually see it once it landed. I only saw them come down. So Ian sprints down the sidewalk and across the street, and I follow. He was athletic due to diet and exercise, whereas I was in remarkably good shape due to anxiety and self-loathing. And as we approached, a big oak tree blocked our view of where it landed. But as soon as we got past the tree, we saw something crawling on the roof, and I heard it too, the scratching of claws on shingle. But it wasn't loud. The roof was very high, and therefore far away, so the sound had a lot of space to diffuse. And this is what I saw. And again, I know how it sounds, but to me, it looked like a wobbling rod, like a wobbling log with legs, like a long, fat-bodied lizard kind of thing. I saw it go all the way from the gutters by the eave of the roof to over the top edge. I saw it for probably between 3 and 4 seconds. It didn't move particularly fast, so we ran around the house again to get a better look at it. But there was nothing to be seen by the time we got around the house. But to really see where it had gone, we would have had to go to the backyard of the house behind it, and they had a fence. I even looked for some kind of entrance into the house's attic, like a slit or gap that it may have come into the house from. But of course there was nothing. I followed Ian as he investigated most of the roofs on that block, and we were both reasonably well-to-do suburban kids with college ambitions and whatnot, so I can tell you it was a fairly big deal that we ran through people's backyards investigating. And after 10 or 15 minutes of scoping out the surrounding roofs and finding absolutely nothing, we trudged back to my porch. I don't remember exactly what he said, but Ian said something referring to those things. Things. Plural. It wasn't until that moment that it occurred to me that we must have saw 2 separate creatures, because he was right. The thing I saw with wings that landed on the roof couldn't possibly have been the same thing I saw scuttling across the roof. The scuttling thing had no wings. From when I first saw the wings settling, to when I saw the cylindrically shaped creature cross over the ridge of the roof was at most 40 seconds. And that's literally it. That's my singular unexplained phenomena of my 35 years of life. And though it was brief, and none of it was particularly clear, I remember it well, and I think about it a lot. The scuttling thing looked like a mutated Komodo dragon, bent at the elbows, and low to the ground, or roof, but it was proportionally wrong. It was too fat for it to be as short as it was. Short as opposed to long, I mean, not height. I'd guess it was somewhere between 9 and 11 feet long, with at least twice the girth of a lizard of that length. It was way too big to be a raccoon or a possum or anything like that. Way too big, in fact, I think, to be a Komodo dragon. The size of the body was more reminiscent to the size of a cow or a horse, though much lower to the ground, and definitely shaped like a lizard. And that's what I remember most vividly about it, the way it moved. It wobbled. It moved kind of like a fish. Its movement side to side correlated with its movement forward. At least, that's what it looked like to me. And here's where the different perspective comes in. Ian said it looked like a big cat, like a climbing cat, so still low to the ground, and dragging itself, kind of like how a cat stalks. And he said it could have been a tiger, because he said he saw distinct stripes. I don't recall any stripes or pattern. And I see where he's coming from with the crouched cat thing, but I saw it too, and it was no cat. My dime store psychology tells me that he saw stripes, and then thought cat because it looked like a tiger. I assure you, this thing didn't look like a cat at all. It looked more like a crocodile that had been molded into a tube. The way it moved was particularly not cat-like. The wobble was definitely the most distinctive feature that I noticed. It was kind of like how a crocodile or a Komodo dragon runs, but exaggerated. In Ian's defense, the thing was definitely proportioned more like a big cat, as in, not snake-like. It was too fat for its length to have been a lizard, but it was lizard-like, and I didn't get the impression of something with long legs. He claims its face was flat. I can't particularly recall the face, and at that distance, I'm skeptical that he made one out. It seems strange that I remember an oscillating mass, and he recalls stripes and a face. But who knows? I do wear glasses, and he doesn't. I really just remember an oscillating mass, a long stout body that rigidly moved side to side as it covered distance, and a quiet skittering. I don't recall a tail, per se, just a tubular body, like a stout lizard, but the whole thing was kind of like a tail. I just assumed that the thing that scuttled was one and the same as the thing that landed. In hindsight, I'm reasonably certain that the thing that fluttered onto the roof could not have been the scuttler. The thing we saw scuttling across the roof didn't have wings, let alone giant wings. Even if they were folded really tightly against the body, I think I would have saw them. The crawler's body was very log-like, unironically tubular. And of course, nothing has wings in addition to 4 limbs. The wings are the 4 limbs, or arms, I guess. And this thing just had little nubby front limbs. Anything with 4 legs, in addition to wings, is basically a dragon. And this is neither here nor there, but I'd suspect the wings we saw were too large to belong to the lizard-like thing. But then again, maybe they were appropriately sized. I guess wings would have to be enormous to lift something so solidly built. Either way, there were no wings on the crawler. Later that week, I believe, Ian and I actually knocked on the door to talk to the owner of the house. He was an elderly gentleman, a widower who lived with his sister. He was friendly, but only minorly interested. I think he believed us. Or at least, he didn't think we were lying, but he didn't seem interested in the subject. No, not in an evasive way, but he seemed to think we were there for a school project or something, and no matter how many times we told him that wasn't the case, he couldn't be convinced otherwise. He was eager to talk to us, just not about the thing we saw. I don't think he could hear us too well, and I think he was just happy to have company. The house was quite the spectacle, and has historical significance. I can guarantee that this was not the first time he'd given a tour of the house. We even asked if we could check out his attic, and he said yes. And it was terrifying, and I suspected he was going to trap us up there. But he didn't, and there was nothing of note. No opening, and no signs of anything living up there. It was actually an intriguing visit, but nothing useful came of it regarding our sighting. My only explanation for all of this is a pretty standard one. Sometimes the veil thins. I heard that somewhere back along the line, and that about covers it. Why a giant but stubby lizard and a massive winged creature would convene at an exact spot on any given New England roof is a complete mystery, but I think it's arrogant to presume that I should understand. I have no idea what I saw that night. Not a clue. But I know I saw something. and someone else saw it too, so it wasn't my imagination or a trick of the light. And I know for a fact that this world conceals more than meets the eye. And I'd like to add that the only reason I'm interested in the Sasquatch phenomena at all is because I've gone on to get my master's in education, and I can tell you that the closed-mindedness and echo chamber effect in academia is absurd. I don't think it's a conspiracy. I think it's herd mentality. Much love, Avery. Okay, hi, back to me. And I'd like to make a quick note of one thing I've struggled with since I first started using an illustrator. This is not what the witness saw, but it's very difficult to instruct an illustrator to draw something that the witness didn't really see clearly. The witness said that what he saw looked like a large, wobbling rod with small legs, a stubby or stumpy tail, or no tail at all, a stubby mouth or a flat face, and that in its entirety, it seemed too thick for its length. So like, if it was the length of a 9-foot crocodile, it was twice as girthy, and I guess that's why he said it looked like a mutated Komodo dragon. So I just want to be clear, this illustration isn't what he saw. This is Adrian's best attempt at a feasible interpretation of what the witness saw. This is about the best we could come up with, as for what he actually saw. I am curious if anyone out there can think of a creature that this resembles. Any creature at all. Perhaps I mean even a long-extinct one. And I'm not suggesting that some kind of extinct archosaur was crawling across a Delaware roof in 2006, but I'm trying to figure out if such a thing is even, shall I say, earthly in origin. Another example of how it's hard to illustrate, or depict encounters like this, regards the winged creature. This is what Adrian came up with for a zoological spin on it, but the witness was very clear that he couldn't make out any definable anatomical features. He said he merely made out what looked like billowing wings, almost like 2 bags or sheets of canvas, caught in an updraft. So I created a more nondescript interpretation. It's just hard to have someone draw that which lacks suitable descriptive reference, which is precisely the case with both the winged creature and the crawler. Yet another example of the difficulty in illustrating such a happening is that surely in reality the sky was darker than in the rinky-dink graphic I made. This would have been more accurate as to what he saw, I'm sure. I think. But it does little good if you can't see it at all. The human eye can glean incalculably more nuance than I could possibly have the skill to replicate. Okay, next. I'll drop it after this, but one of the few comments that still irks me are the comments that say, "Why are all these witness reports written in the same style?" Well, I heavily edit them while leaving the events as unchanged as possible. Just by virtue of how long I've been doing this, I can usually arrange the info in a more, explicit or concise way than the witness can. So that's what I do. I'm still not totally clear on why this is so contentious, but yes, I write all of these. No, I do not make them up. I'm not going to read the report that he sent me. That would be quite redundant. But in the spirit of full disclosure, I'll read most of the questions and answers I went through with this particular witness. And see, it's kind of a good case study as to why I rewrite these reports, because the way I do it incorporates the need-to-know stuff into the narrative, because your average witness doesn't realize or maybe hasn't thought of all the details that need to be included. And I don't like reading email chains, quite frankly, which is why I put it all together, just to make them more cohesive. But the following questions and answers are word for word, verbatim. I said, "Can you be more specific about the wings you saw?" He said, "Sure, I didn't see any flapping, just these long, wide, billowing wings descending the roof, like 2 parachutes. They were billowy, and not as stiff like what you see with birds. They were landing, so they were kind of open and flexed, and not flapping. They weren't moving fast, weren't coming down fast. Ian saw it longer than I did, but he said he saw them floating down." I said, "But did you see them move, like how an animal would? How did you know they weren't 2 parachutes? How did you know it wasn't just a tarp or something?" He said, "They definitely moved on their own volition, not like something caught in the wind. They moved, but there was no flapping, is what I meant. They arranged themselves." I said, "You said that the wingspan, while bent, was 30 to 40 feet. That's huge, and you said they were almost half the length of the house. Did you mean to say that?" He said, "Yes, I stand by that, but I see what you're saying. That house is gigantic. I just Googled it, and it's 5,300 square feet, so half the length of the roof was easy 30 to 40 feet. And it was down the street away, so I wasn't looking at the house head-on." I said, I see. New paragraph. "You're describing very large creatures. And you said you were running around the neighborhood at midnight. Were you scared or concerned about that? He said, no, I was extremely curious. Wanting to know outweighed any fear by a lot. I really wanted to know what it was. I still do. And with the house being so big, it's not like I was exactly close to it. The distance from yard to roof was still quite a ways. So being in the backyard wasn't exactly close to whatever was there. We couldn't really even see the roof of the house from the house's backyard. So we had to kind of run around the surrounding yards. And the best view from behind was fenced off, so we couldn't get to the best place to get to the best view. I said, how do you know it landed on the roof at all, if you didn't see it land since it was behind the house? He said, it was pretty clearly coming to a stop. The wings were ballooning, or parachuting, kind of like how a bird lands, but like a big-bodied bird, like a duck or a goose. If it was landing on the ground, I don't think it would have come to a stop like 4 stories up. Just by how it looked, it still wasn't really like a bird. It was like parachutes collapsing, kind of. I asked, was there wind? He said no, not that I recall. I said, do you remember any avian features other than the wings? He said, no beak or head or talons, just the wings hovering or fluttering for a second. Ian saw it for a second longer than I did, but he only saw wings too. He said there was a mass in the middle, but it was mostly behind the wings. I said, feathers? He said, I can't say I recall feathers. No. I said, because there were no feathers, or because it was too far away to make out feathers? He said, I don't know. I said, was it like a bat? He said no. Sorry, I'm not being very helpful. XD. I said, don't worry about it. Was there any color or color pattern? At all? He said, it was hard to see. It wasn't a dark night, but it wasn't a bright night either. But the wings were significantly darker than the sky, and I'd say similarly colored as the roof. If not black, they were dark. I said, you said your friend thought it was a tiger. Does he believe he saw a tiger on that roof that night? Avery said, he said it was like a tiger. I assure you, Ian has no idea what he saw that night some 20 years ago. He said it was like a tiger. I asked, did it have a tail? He said, it was like one big tail. So no, LOL. Does a snake have a tail? I said, I'll ask Aristotle, LOL. Do you think you saw biological animals that day? He said, they definitely had mass. I heard the second one. Saw and heard it. I said, do you think they were animals, though? Like blood, organs, flesh? He said, yes, they were organic. I said, so animals. He said, I don't know. I said, what could they be if not animals? He said, I don't know. I said, I'm confused. He said, me too. I said, are you certain you saw 2 separate animals? That seems a bit much. He said, yes. The second creature I saw definitely had 4 legs and no wings. I said, you're sure it wasn't using 4 limbs like a bat? He said, positive. They were legs and not big ones, and its back was level. Nothing that uses its arms as wings is level. I said, that's a good point and I'll be stealing that. You said the crawling creature went over the ridge of the house, and then you couldn't find it again. What do you make of that? He said, I can't stress this enough. The house is really big, and it was hard to get a view from the ground. We had to run all the way around it to see. We couldn't see anything from right against the wall of the house, so we had to make kind of a big circle around it, and it was gone by the time we did. Looking at a roof is more complicated than it sounds, especially a complex roof like this one was. It could have easily been on part of the roof that we couldn't see. But what? Is it just going to hang out there forever? I said, no, that totally makes sense. You can't see the top of a roof from below it. Did you get the impression that the homeowner was hiding something? He said, no, he was just old. I don't think he ever understood what we were trying to tell him. He thought we were doing a school project about the house, and we just went with it. He had fun, LOL. I said, do you think the creatures are somehow related to the house? Like that was their destination? He said, I don't see how, or why, but it also doesn't seem random. I said, I agree. Just curious, you said you can't remember if it was 2005 or 2006, but you remember the month was May. You remember the month but not the year? He said, I remember Ian talking about the last lacrosse game of the season that night, which meant we'd start walking home together, and that was in May. I said, haha, makes sense. I'm just preparing for comments. I read too many comments. It sounds like your friendship with him was important to you. Dare I ask your dynamic? I just want to know what I'm describing here. He said, nothing gross, on his end at least. He was my only guy friend, and I was bullied really bad. Really bad. And I was kind of weird, so I own it. But it was really bad. But for some reason, when that guy was next to me, there was no disrespect at all. It was like a light switch. If I walked down the hall alone, I'd regularly get shoved or slurred or insulted. Like, hey, you fucking it, and get slammed into a locker or whatever. But if I walked down the hall with Ian, it was all nods and what's-ups. It was like magic, and it's not like he ever even protected me or defended me or anything. But if he was there, I was just another kid. If he wasn't there, I was a target. I'm sure there were rumors about us, but if he knew or cared, he never said anything. I asked, are you still close? He said, time, man. I asked, so you two would meet at that time and place regularly, and had only the one experience? He said yes. I said, so you probably kept your eyes peeled from then on, huh? He said, you have no idea. I became the strangest kind of birdwatcher. I said, other than smoking and chatting, you weren't doing anything out of the ordinary. No summoning rituals or occult ceremonies. Not sure if I'm serious or not. He said no, and I hope I didn't give too much info. I was just trying to justify why we were there. We met at my porch religiously in high school, and I only slept like 3 to 7 a.m., and these little porch meetings were just about the only thing in my life that I looked forward to. I asked, so you don't have to justify anything to me. I just want to make sure I can translate what's up to the viewers. Anyway, I think that's about all I need to know for now. I'll let you know if this ever gets videoed. It'll definitely be a while if it does. I hope life has become kinder to you. He said, please don't use our real names or the town. I don't really care, but I'd rather not make waves. And thanks, Bob, I appreciate it. I'm doing all right these days. I said, loud and clear, I've already renamed you. Glad to hear it. Take care. So that was almost all of the Q&A. My plan was to read all the Q&A, but there's like 12 more minutes that I skipped in the middle there. I didn't realize how long it would turn out to be. And if that sounded boring, that's because it was. And that's why I don't read all this stuff word for word. I'm just trying to explain to you why I rewrite these. I need a lot more info than is initially provided to understand the situation. Like, well, first and foremost, just from his initial write-up, I thought he was a girl. So there's that. He's got one of those names that can go either way, which is why I renamed him Avery, by the way. Technically, he has a boy's name, but literally every one of them I know is a girl, so. But, more relevantly, another example would be that he didn't mention that the house was huge, and the encounter didn't really make sense to me until I knew that the house was enormous. Losing sight of a creature with a 30-foot wingspan and a lizard thing the size of a horse doesn't really make sense on an average-sized house. Another such example, again just from the way he wrote his initial report, was that I thought his friend actually thought it was a tiger. But no, he meant his friend thought it looked like a tiger. And I thought, how can one person describe this and another person describe a tiger? But the Q&A cleared that up. So I cleared it up in the story. So I just wanted to give an explanation as to why all the encounters I cover sound like they were written by me. Yes, I write these. No, I don't make them up. On a similar vein of criticism, people often say something is too dramatized to be real. Like, have you ever been alive? Life is actually kind of dramatic, especially when one or more humans are involved. Anyway, in the beginning I said that I've never received or even heard of a report like this, but I actually realized that that's not entirely true. I received a report from New Mexico, where an elk hunter saw an unknown creature on a ridgeline. I covered this in an earlier video. It was far away, but the witness said he saw a 4-legged gray creature, the size of a grizzly bear, with skin like a rhinoceros. It had a smooth, flat head, and was holding what was either a dog or coyote in its mouth. He saw it with binoculars. He said its shoulders to its elbows were level to the ground, and its elbows were bent at right angles. Its arms and legs didn't go backwards like a normal animal, so it was square, or rectangular. It was kind of scuttling like a bug, and it was traversing a ridge that was too steep for the witness to climb. The right angles are really the similarity here. Most large animals, mammals specifically, just can't be built like this. Whether you're talking about a dog, a moose, or a triceratops, these legs have to come straight down. Modern reptiles are really the only exception, and that's why they have such a pronounced side-to-side motion, or scuttling ambulation, you could say. And that's why the, quote, mutated Komodo dragon description rang so true to me. Komodo dragons are really the only large-bodied terrestrial reptiles I can think of to draw a comparison. The legs coming out to the side instead of going down would certainly give it that wobbling or side-to-side look. And again, the description really reminds me of a giant tortoise with no shell, or something like that. Our witness in Delaware's account wasn't quite descriptive enough regarding the skin and face to make a match to the sighting in New Mexico, but everything else sounds pretty similar, including, curiously, going over a ridge, but I don't see how that can be anything other than a coincidence. Just for reference, I did a little thinking about the thing that landed in regard to pterosaurs. The witness said that the wingspan of the thing he saw was 30 feet or greater, which is about what we should see from, say, a Quetzalcoatlus. And he said the body of the crawly thing was comparable to the body size of a horse or a tiger, and Quetzalcoatlus had a much larger body than that, or probably did. This is the small estimate, so whatever landed on the roof was probably a great deal larger than the crawly thing that had no wings. There are an astounding number of flying humanoid sightings, and that's going to be its own video one of these days, but I'm not sure what to make of it yet. Far too many sightings to easily cast aside, but that doesn't seem to be this encounter's speed. Reports like this are in some ways my favorite type of encounters, because they're just so... what? It's a strange tale to make up. It doesn't really fit into any historical folklore or modern superstition, which is essentially just creepypasta. Working on this video is kind of trippy to me. I received this man's email in 2019. It was on a list of illustration orders to give to Fred, as soon as he finished up the bear order. So, Avery, if you're still out there, I told you it might take a while. But what do you make of this? The descriptions aren't really zoological, nor prehistoric, and nothing came of it as far as I can see. In fact, perhaps the only enigma reminiscent of this sighting at all would be the Jersey Devil, which is a legend endemic to South Jersey, so rather close, actually. Legend says that Mrs. Leeds had 12 children, and then as she was giving birth to her 13th, she said, "Let this one be the devil." And it was, and it flew into the pine forest with its newborn wings. Interestingly enough, a will was uncovered by a historical society, written by one Japhet Leeds, and he left his belongings to his wife, Deborah Leeds, and his 12 children. So the origin story seems to be true, though obviously there's no direct evidence of devilry. But if I saw this in the 17 or 1800s, I'd probably call it a devil. If I saw it today, I might call it a devil. Anyway, please make sure to like the video and subscribe if you haven't already. And anyway again, and as always, thanks an awful lot for listening.